Last but not least, we circle back to quarterback. We're not going to talk about Caleb Williams, Drake May, Jaden Daniels, or J.J. McCarthy because all we've done is talk about, especially those last three for the last couple of months here. So I think there's a lot of questions coming out of Michael Penix's pro day, Logan, about him because he tested a lot better than people expected. Why is Penix not in the higher group, especially now that he's run like a 4.4 640 and all of a sudden you're like, oh, maybe he's a better athlete than we anticipated?
Yeah, and I think it's important to understand that Michael Penix Jr. is a good football player. He's like, I think you watch the film, you see him make plays. I think you see the arm talent. I mean, he can absolutely spin the football like at a very, very high level. The thing about him that I think gives me pause in terms of kind of saying he's a true first round player, and I think if he went in the first round, I wouldn't be surprised. But in terms of my big board, is his pocket awareness. I know he doesn't take sacks, but he doesn't move well in the pocket all the time, and he doesn't throw the ball over the middle of the field, and he's not the most accurate player of all time. So, think about who he's throwing to. He's throwing to, Rome Odunze, Jalen Polk, these guys that are great 50-50 receivers, and they made him right. And it reminded me a lot of kind of the old Dallas Cowboy kind of Air Coryell offense, which is this vertical passing game down the field, and Penix was great at that because he had these studs that could make that go. And so you didn't see a lot of him kind of, again, working the middle of the field, working through long progressions. And again, the offensive line there was excellent. I mean, he's going to have two tackles that'll probably go in the top 60 in terms of picks. We talked about Rosengard and we talked about Fatano already. And I think the two guards are up in next year's class. So very, very good offensive line, and they played that way. And so I think that's something that gives me a little bit pause. He's older. You don't see kind of some of the more NFL-y type throws on film. Not saying he can't do it. Like I talked to John Beck. I guess he's working with him. They're training together. And he said he had to do some really challenging things in terms of reads and downfield reads and kind of these, is this a post or a corner type stuff? And he has a really good feel for that. So if that's true and he interviews well and he shows a high level understanding of coverages, maybe bump him up the board, but I don't have access to that information necessarily. So that's why I'm kind of a little bit wishy-washy on him, because I think you see the arm talent, you like the experience, you like the athlete, but some of the more quarterback-centric kind of specific stuff gets you a little bit nervous it gets me nervous about him as a first-round player.
Yeah, the other thing about the athleticism piece is he doesn't ever use it. So if he's 4.46 fast, that's awesome. He never runs. So that doesn't really do you a whole lot of good having the club in the bag and then just letting it sit in your bag. That's not who he is as a player. As you mentioned, the pocket awareness is just not at the level of the other guys, which shows in the unnecessary throwaways and the lack of movement in the pocket and the lack of scrambles. So he doesn't take a lot of sacks, but that is a misleading number. The other guy that's obviously up there with the top four in terms of that next tier, and not really up there with the top four, but the other guy that gets mentioned and talked about quite a bit is Bo Nix. What is the separator for him? Because there's some interesting underlying data that goes, maybe Bo Nix could be pretty good. But there's obviously a ton of tape on him. Starter at Auburn, starter at Oregon. What's the plus minus on Bo Nix?
Yeah, I've got a guy that I'm friends with, Matt Schmidt, who emails me every day about Bo Nix and how good he is from an advanced metric standpoint, and he's awesome, and I appreciate all the information he's given me because it makes me smarter. The thing about him that the numbers are great, those advanced analytic numbers are great. The thing that I always come back to is that offense insulates him so much quick game, so much kind of quick screens, RPO stuff. And does he make the plays when he's got to make them? Yes. But I think back to when he kind of had to carry the bag a little bit more at Auburn, and it wasn't great. Now he's grown a lot. I like quarterbacks that have a lot of experience. I also think the other thing is that his physical tools don't wow me the same way as that top tier group of guys. Now there's a lot of guys that have been successful with kind of less than ideal tools. But I think he's a guy that I like watching his film. I think he's a better athlete than people think of. I think he's got a good enough arm. So I don't want to take that as a huge negative. For me, the big factor is more the offense and how little heavy lifting he had to do. We talked about J.J. McCarthy a lot and how every time he throws the ball, it's this huge lift. Bo Nix, it's they found ways to make sure that he didn't have to do heavy lifting, which is fine. But it gets me nervous, when it's time to do it against NFL talent. What's that look like?
Yeah. So my guy Tim, a frequent listener to the shows, tweeted me with some interesting stuff. Typically, if you tweet me with multiple tweets of data and information, I'm going to be like, you need a hobby. But this was actually good work from Tim. This is the rare time that it paid off. So his average depth of target on plays that were not screen passes was actually 11.1 yards down the field. So like pretty good. And Tim actually did the numbers. They had 190 passes that were screens, but that left 324 attempts for Nix, which is 84 more than McCarthy had all year total. And on throws past the sticks, the PFF grade was 94.8, which is the same as Jaden Daniels. So like there's some interesting data. And then also 100%. Like he actually sent me another thing that talked about, and I'm sure you got this number too, how good he was over the middle of the field, which is obviously something that a lot of people talk about. His PFF grade was really, really good, especially in the intermediate range. So there's a lot of interesting data, but I think at the end of the day, you go back to the traits part. And I think that people don't want to take quarterbacks high that they don't think are going to elevate their team, which I think is the holdup for a lot of people on McCarthy. And I'm like, well, that means just you haven't watched that kid, but that's a different story. We're not talking about that right now. But like for Nix, if I am a team that is like looking for a solid 2, or I'm like trying to recreate what Kyle did with Brock Purdy, I think Nix is an intriguing option there.
I think so too. I think like Minnesota, team like that, Minnesota, New Orleans.
Like if Minnesota strikes out and can't trade up and can't get their hands on McCarthy and can't get their hands on May or Daniels or whoever it is that they want, and they have to settle and take Nix at 23, like I actually still think that's not, like I think they could be good.
Yeah, I think that's how I agree. I think he needs more around him than some of the top guys do. And I think, you know, an argument that I like for him is that he's going to grow. He could grow into something more kind of the Kirk Cousins of this year's class, who he showed good things at Michigan State, but kind of sat for a year, you know, was in an offense that insulated him and then grew and becomes a player that last year was playing like a top 10 guy. So I do think that's in the cards for him. It's just he does have some growing to do. And, you know, I'm just interested to see what this looks like when he's got to do a lot of serious heavy lifting, because there's also times where, you know, he's making, and everyone does this, so this isn't like a criticism specifically of him, but, you know, where he's forcing throws and doing things where you're like, don't do that, like why, and struggle a little bit at the Senior Bowl. So yeah, there's a lot of things. I like the prospect, I like the player. I have a hard time being like, this is the guy you should pick in the top 10 or whatever, just because the traits aren't there. And again, the way the offense insulated him, I think was another thing that really stuck out to me that makes me a little bit cautious.
Of the next group of guys, your Rattlers, your Pratts, your Miltons, whoever else you want to throw in there, who's the guy you like a little bit more than everyone else?
I don't know. I mean, Spencer Rattler's the guy that I like because I think he could project to being an NFL quarterback at some point, and I don't think that's outside of what the league is expecting, right? I mean, they seem to say he's the next guy, right? It's Bo Nix, Michael Penix Jr., or however you have those guys.
Yeah, some people put Rattler in the mix with those two and even higher than one or both of them.
Yeah, and I think maybe if you want to go deep cut, Devin Leary from University of Kentucky is a guy that I like. I think he's got some better arm talent than people think. I don't know if he's anything more than a backup at any point in his career, but got a little playmaker to him. Seems like he's going to be UDFA, but you know, if you're looking for just a name, like that's a guy that stuck out to me that I've watched that I thought, hey, you know, this isn't bad to watch. So,
all right, one more guy I'm going to ask you about specifically because I feel like every couple of weeks we get a comment asking about this guy. What about Jordan Travis from Florida State? Really great year last year until it comes crashing down with a really bad knee injury. Obviously, the rehab is going to be a huge part of this, but like, what is he as a prospect?
Yeah, he's tough. And I told you, I've watched Keon Coleman a ton and I've watched Johnny Wilson a ton. And one of the things about Travis is I don't think he sees the field at a high level. I don't think he was asked to, but I don't think he does just in general. Like you got to kind of see guys come open to make the throw, not very anticipatory and also not very accurate, you know, and I think like that's something that I have a hard time with. I think he's a good athlete. I think he's competitive. I think there's a lot of things to like about him, but in terms of how his game translates to the NFL level, I understand why there's a lot of skepticism about who he is and what he does. Because it's like, to me, I want to see you be accurate. I want to see you make certain types of throws. And unfortunately on his tape, he's throwing to Johnny Wilson, who I think is an excellent football player, Keon Coleman, who's probably going to be a top 60 pick, and he made those guys work for those receptions. Like they had to do a lot. And I don't think you want and obviously he seems like a guy that could be a backup, maybe a 3 in some instances, that grows and matures and develops some of these traits we're talking about and becomes a player, but he's definitely not ready right now. I don't think.
Yeah. And by the way, I literally just got this notification. If you're thinking of any of those guys as Commanders QB 3 or 4, unlikely. They just signed Jake Driscoll. So there you go. Breaking news that is not going to be breaking by the time this goes public, because that's not how podcasts work. But the Commanders just signed Jake Driscoll. This whole exercise of going through the position groups like we just did, we're going to do it again later in the week. We're going to do it on the defensive side of the ball. So we will see you
We didn't
then.
do freaks. What are you talking about, Craig? We got to do freaks in the quarterback.
Yeah, of course.
Who is it?
We get it. It's Joe Milton. It's Joe Milton.
Just as long as that's clear.
Gigantic, gargantuan size-wise. He has a howitzer attached to his shoulder.
Fast.
He runs fast. Like he's a train that has like a flamethrower attached to it. I don't know what more people want.
Yeah, that's the guy. So he's the all freaks quarterback, but yeah, I don't know what his completion percentage looks like, but yeah, he's got all the tools you want. So another guy, just throw that name out there.
All the physical tools you want.
Correct. Yes, yeah. Correct.
So we're gonna do this for defense later in the week. That is our show. All praise the arm of Joe Milton, and we'll see you next time on Take Command. Thanks for watching this clip of Take Command, which has a brand new home.
That's right. You can watch on YouTube at the Team 980.
You can also listen to full episodes in the free Odyssey app, which is now enabled with Apple CarPlay. So we'll just, follow you around.